What's up, everyone? I'm sure you saw the title of this video and you wanted to click on it because you were like, what? The final episode? Yes, this is the final episode of the See-Through podcast. It's kind of surreal to say that, but I've been running this thing since May 2020. So it's been 5 years of my life and it's been a great 5 years. So this is kind of sad. This is kind of a sad episode, but there's some happiness going to be sprinkled into this episode. Probably more happiness than sadness. So let's start with some happiness, and it kind of ties into the announcement part of that title in the video. And to announce that, I'm going to put on this hat first because it's a kind of a clue. Now, why am I wearing this hat? If you look on my merch store, the name of this hat is called the See-Through Dad Hat. Got any guesses yet? Yes, I'm going to be a dad. My wife is pregnant and she's due in July. So it's coming up quick and I couldn't be more excited for anything in my life. And the last thing I want to be doing is editing my podcast on a Saturday instead of spending time with my wife and son. So I'm making the call. The podcast is going on an indefinite hiatus, on top of, wanting to have time to spend with my family. There's kind of practical concerns. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, and with podcasting, you need a few things. And one of the main things you need is a quiet space to interview. And with a newborn crying at any time they want to, especially with this being a 1-bedroom apartment where I don't have like a separate space, I'm not going to be immune to a baby crying during an interview. Also, you need flexibility in your schedule to kind of accommodate your guest. Some of them live in different time zones and you have to work with their work schedules, your work schedule. Basically, flexibility with time and a quiet space. I don't think that's going to be possible for a long time. So with that said, I'm kind of making a practical decision to, retire the podcast. I've done 126 episodes. And when I started, my goal was 100. So I have done 26 more episodes than I had planned to. It's been a wild ride. I mean, think about it. How much have you changed since May 2020? I feel like a completely different person than I was from when I started this podcast. And a lot of that has to do with me podcasting and getting to know myself through my conversations with my guests and even the people who message me and everything on Instagram and social media or leave a comment. I've hit a lot of major milestones in my life while doing this podcast. I've gotten married. My wife's now pregnant. My niece was born. I've traveled, and then some sad things happen, like my dad passed during this podcast. A lot of things has happened. I mean, a lot can happen in 5 years, but what's been a consistent thread for me in those 5 years has been this podcast. Not a day has went by where I didn't do something related to this podcast, whether it's thinking about the next guest, posting something on social media, replying to people on social media, prepping for an interview, editing interviews, designing merch, revising logos. There's just been a lot of kind of heart and kind of, blood, sweat, and tears put into this podcast. So the decision to end this podcast is very, very difficult for me, but I'm so excited about becoming a dad. It kind of makes up for it. And I'm excited. There's nothing more I want to be in my life than a dad. So I have to prioritize that. But I don't want this to feel like a goodbye, because while the podcasting era of See-Through is ending, See-Through as a platform is going to continue. And what I mean by that is I'm going to continue to post solo content, not episodes like this, but solo content similar to the mini-sodes that I put out in the past. And in these solo videos, I'll talk about my life. I'll share stories. I'll provide insights on what's going on as I, travel along my vision loss journey. I want to continue to share my life with everyone, and See-Through is going to be the way I do it. It just won't be in the form of the podcast. And the reason why I can continue doing solo content versus the podcast is because with solo content, I can be in control of when, where, and how I create it. So if I end up having like a free time window, it fits in with my family schedule, that will be the time I need to create And with podcasting, sometimes even if that's when you can do it, your guest can't. So this is my way of kind of bypassing having to work with other people's schedules and kind of deciding when and how I want to create. I still will have a lot to kind of work around to kind of pull off continuing to make videos, but this is the only way forward that's possible, to be honest with you. Plus, I'm excited to share more about myself with everyone. I think, kind of going solo will be a new experience for everyone. You'll get to learn more about me. I want to share parenting insights that I learn along the way and how that relates to vision loss. I've already kind of experienced some instances that relate to vision loss when it comes to parenting. And I'm going to share those with you in future videos. So make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel because that's where, I'm going to be mainly posting. That's my main priority. And then will continue to post, content on social media. But when it comes to Spotify and Apple Podcasts and any streaming platforms, you will not get any new material there. I do want to say that those episodes will stay up there. So you can always go to your favorite podcast platform and listen to any episodes. Go back and listen to old episodes you haven't heard yet. There's 126 of them. So that's always an option. But, moving forward, that's kind of how it's going to work. It's going to be in the form of YouTube or social media content. And while the podcast can't be replaced because my guests just share such personal insights that only they can share with me, and we can have this back and forth kind of conversation where we share ideas. I will miss that a ton. And I love shining a spotlight on people in the blind and disability communities and sharing their stories with everyone. It's been a real kind of blessing for me to be able to package people's stories in like a digestible way. Your favorite comedians, entertainers, athletes, they get to go on podcasts and you get to learn more about them. But, this was my way of, letting you hear from some of your favorite, blind and disabled creators. And I didn't get to talk to everyone that I wanted to talk to. So that's also kind of a bummer in terms of ending the podcast because I didn't get to speak to everyone I wanted to. But I do feel like I covered a ton of ground and it's impossible to tell everyone's story. I really tried to kind of share a variety of people's personalities and stories and disabilities to kind of keep everyone interested. A little something for everyone. And I'll continue to do that with my solo videos. I'm going to cover various things about various disabilities, various topics. It won't get stale, won't get boring. So that will continue. And if I'm going to be honest, I talk about transparency on the See-Through podcast. I didn't get quite the success that I wanted to when it comes to podcasting. With that said, this has not been a failure at all. Just because this podcast is ending doesn't mean that I'm disappointed in the podcast or it's a failure. It's not that at all. I built this thing from zero. When I started, I had 0 listeners, 0 followers, 0 anything. And, over these last 5 years, the podcast has been downloaded, over 20,000 times on streaming platforms. My YouTube has close to 400,000 views now. And when it comes to watch time on YouTube, which is the amount of time, like the cumulative time people spend watching my videos on YouTube, that comes out to over 7,000 hours. So people have spent over 7,000 hours on YouTube watching my content. So to start that from nothing, it's pretty cool. And to do it all as a one-man team is also pretty cool. It's something that I'm really proud of. And would I have loved it to become my full-time job? 100%. But it didn't happen. And luckily, I have a day job. Luckily, I'm a video editor and I can pay my bills that way. And with that said, too, I also, outside of wanting to make space for being a dad, I want to make space for my career. And with that said, I want to edit more short films. I want to edit music videos. I want to gain more freelance clients when it comes to video editing. And to do that, I need more space in my calendar. So that's also another big reason of why I'm transitioning the podcast away from See-Through. I need to make money. I need to provide, for my family. And unfortunately, the podcast does not provide monetary, value, for me and my family. And that's something I have to factor in. This is, it's 2025. Things are expensive. And I live in one of the most expensive neighborhoods in the nation. So I hope you understand, just being honest. And looking back, every year Every year I hit an anniversary marker, first year, second year, third year, fourth year. I've done a solo episode kind of reflecting. This is kind of following that trend. In the past, I've kind of talked about certain things, and I thought about, what do I want to talk about in this episode? How can I summarize 5 years of feeling and emotion and ups and downs and failures and wins of podcasting? How can I portray all that in an episode? And to be honest with you, I just can't. And if you've been listening from the beginning, you've probably seen the podcast change, and that's just what you see on the surface. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes, like I talked about. Just a lot of time put into this thing. And I can't express how grateful I am for what this podcast has taught me, as a man. I've grown so much more comfortable with myself and my eye condition than when I started. When I started this podcast, I was scared to death of retinitis pigmentosa. And now I truly feel at peace with my RP. I feel confident that I'll be able to take on whatever RP throws my way. I've had cane training since I've started this. I now know about assistive technology. I now have a network of friends that I've made through this podcast that are there to give me advice and help me along the way as I hit certain milestones in vision loss. I don't feel alone anymore. I don't feel isolated. I don't feel ignorant about blindness. In fact, I feel almost like I went through like a PhD program or something because, I've spent so many hours talking to people and consuming content, reading about things just so I can be a better host for the podcast. But yeah, I'm just so much more better prepared to tackle the world and life, with my RP. That's unreal. I mean, what more could I want from that? I just talked about the podcast didn't really provide monetary value. Now I'm kind of talking about the value it did bring. It feels cringy to say, but I have great fans. I have a lot of nice people that reach out to me and keep up with this podcast. And I wouldn't have kept doing this if I didn't feel like I had some support. So for the people who have listened and stuck around and regularly check out my episodes, thank you so much. And any guest that has agreed to come on the podcast, I just want to say thanks to you too. Without you agreeing to come on, there would be no conversations to be heard or to have had. And anyone who's bought merch, thank you. By the way, the merch store will stay up, even though the podcast is ending. I have a lot of gratitude that I want to express, and it's not going to come through, but I'm trying. I just want to express my gratitude. I'm throwing gratitude towards the camera right now, and I hope you're able to catch it on the other side. So yeah, I just, long story short, I can't express it in words, and it's not going to come across in this episode. It's impossible. Just know that this podcast means the world to me. I'm so proud of this podcast, and I wouldn't be the person I am right now without it. And with that said, I don't want this podcast to just kind of be an update on that front. I don't want it to just feel like, hey, this is the last episode, here's why, and peace out. So I want to kind of continue to reflect. I thought it would be nice to kind of go back and talk about my favorite episode from each year of doing this podcast, because, it goes back to 2020. And if a lot of you are new, then you might not have gone back and listened to the old school episodes, when that was just audio. The first 50 episodes of the See-Through podcast were just audio. And it wasn't until episode 50 till I started doing video. And even the video aspect has changed as I kind of changed my formula, how I structure the podcast. So, but the old school episodes, they're still solid. They're still good. They still hold up. Trust me. So I just want to quickly kind of go over my favorite episode from each year and why, to maybe inspire you to go back and listen to some older episodes. And again, these episodes are not going anywhere. They're going to be up forever. So feel free to take your time. But to start, let's talk about 2020. So in 2020, that's the first year of doing it. Keep in mind, I had zero podcasting experience, so I was just kind of making it up as I went. I also had very little knowledge of the blindness community and the disabilities and community in general. So I was a complete newbie, and you can hear that in my interviews and how I talk about things. But my favorite interview of 2020 was interviewing Maline Connor. She's the daughter of an old coworker of mine, Kate Connor, which is the episode before hers. It's kind of like a part 1 and part 2 kind of episodes. But Madeline was so sweet. She's the youngest guest I've ever had. And not only was she born blind, but she beat leukemia. And despite all that, she had the best attitude.
My favorite quote, though, is tough times don't last, but tough people do.
She was so nice. It was such a fun conversation. And it's such a positive episode that, you know, that episode could have had a dark vibe to it. But no, it was super bright and fun. And I owe that to Madeline. And that episode has been one of my most successful episodes too, by the way. For some reason on YouTube, it kind of got a random boost and it's hit over 1,000 plays. So if you haven't listened to that one, I'd recommend go listening to that one. That's my 2020 choice. And then in 2021, to keep this thing going, my favorite interview of that year was my sister. I brought my sister on. She also lives with retinitis pigmentosa, but that was not why we talked. We talked about my nephew, Easton, who passed away one day after being born due to complications with his kidneys and lungs. And as someone who loves my sister so much and felt extreme pain from that whole scenario, I thought it was kind of nice to honor my nephew by having my sister come on and share his story.
To grieve a child loss or, you know, the death of a child or any loved one, it's basically choosing, or not choosing, but getting to a point where, like you said, you're comfortable being uncomfortable, where the pain I feel when I think of him or when I am reminded of him, it's not welcome isn't the right word, but it's what I have of him. And I've reached a point where I'm okay with it. I guess that's the best way I could explain it.
And to kind of document that, because it's a real thing that happened and it's not something that I want to forget about. It's not something that I want to put under the rug. So the fact that I was able to bring my sister on and have a great conversation with her where she gets to explain to people what happened in more detail, I'm just glad that I was able to do that and we were able to pull it off. And shout out to Easton. Wish you were here. But to move on, in 2022, my favorite episode from that year was with Andy Ogg and his wife Angela Ogg, and also my wife Natalie. So that was a fun episode because one, I got to drag my wife onto the podcast. And she was very nervous and had never done a podcast before. So that was fun. But also I got to talk to the wonderful Andy Ogg and his wife to talk about, you know, just kind of marriage as a interabled kind of situation where the wife is sighted and the husbands have a vision condition. Andy is way further along in his vision loss journey. You know, I would describe him as a blind man. And to hear, you know, their insights and for Natalie to share her insights and for us to have a back and forth about, you know, being married or just being serious couple and dealing with vision loss and retinitis pigmentosa was fun. I have to give my wife a chance to loosen up. She's very nervous. Can you introduce yourself to everyone?
Yes.
Spotlight's on you.
Thank you.
No pressure though.
No pressure. Zero pressure. Just spotlight Natalie, go.
And people got a lot out of it. And I think a lot of people kind of crave these conversations about romance and dating because it's just the main part of people's lives that people want to kind of figure out and know more about and lock down. And I was glad that I was able to have that conversation with Andy. And shout out to Andy because he's a father of 3 and he's been texting me, calling me, giving me so much helpful tips about, you know, what to expect during a pregnancy. So Andy's just a solid dude. He's also been back on the podcast another time where he described a vacation. But yeah, that episode was just a fun time. It was just simply a pleasure to kind of to do that and to be able to converse with another couple. It was very fun. And moving on to 2023, I want to talk about my episode with Sammy Mina, who is also known as the Blood Manor Clown. I released that episode right around Halloween, and it felt kind of thematic to the time. And it was just a fun episode. I love Halloween, and Sammy was such a nice guy. And to give you a little more insight into Sammy, you know, he has a prosthetic eye. And for the haunted house, he typically dresses up as a scary clown. And he's able to do things with his eye, you know, that are simply scary. Like, for example, he would stick a fork in his eye or pop his eye out, and it scares people. But he loves doing it. And the irony of it, I think the what was fun about the episode was Sammy was such a nice, sweet guy, but his job is scaring people.
I discovered people are scared of clowns.
Yeah.
And after a while, I made that my thing. So for past so many years, that's my character. It's improv, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. And people are scared of it, so I love it.
And it was just kind of fun to explore that dynamic and be able to do a Halloween themed episode. And I think that episode is slept on and it's one of my favorite episodes. So now we're in 2024 and my favorite episode was the Enchanted Hills Camp for the Blind and Visually Impaired. I picked this one because it's the only episode that I've done in person. Yeah, you grew up in a completely different time.
No, I correct you. I did not grow up. I have not grown up. I am growing up. I have not done that yet.
So I flew to San Francisco and went to wine country to hang out at the Enchanted Hills Camp. And I got to sit down with Jerry Coons, who's a legend of the blind community. Such a chill guy. He's like a blind wizard. And I loved hearing his story.
Hey, being blind ain't the worst thing in the world, you know? Starving might be a lot worse. Or not having a drink of water when you need it, or not having the ability to help somebody solve a problem might be a lot worse than not being able to see. Not being able to see is just one piece of this great life that we have the opportunity to live. Get out and do something positive.
And it was just kind of really cool to just sit down in person with somebody. The dynamic is a lot different because doing this podcast, they're all remote except for that one. So there's kind of this awkwardness to kind of staring at screens and talking and having very deep conversations. And in person, it just kind of felt right. And if I were to continue this podcast, I would love to do it in person like that and to only do in person. And that's kind of the dream. And, you know, maybe that'll happen in the future. It's just not happening right now. So if you want to see my only in-person interview, that's the one. And there's also bonus benefits to that episode because I kind of go in depth about the camp. And then I also ended the episode with a exercise I did with some blind teens there where I let them try out podcasting for the first time. And you get to hear their episodes that they came up with.
Well, hello there, everybody. My name is Alexa. Nice to meet everybody who is listening. I am coming to you from Enchanted Hills Camp.
So it's a super cool episode all around. Go check it out. And for the last year of this podcast, feels weird to say, 2025, I'm going to say Steve Johnson. You know, he's my last episode 125. You know, I've had Steve on the podcast twice in the past. He's come on as a guest with Michael Tubiak because they both run the RP show. But I wanted to bring Steve on solo, and I wanted to have the longest conversation that I've ever had. And I did. It was over 3 hours. So I'm in Joe Rogan territory now. Steve Johnson, welcome back to the See-Through Podcast.
My boy Lance, how's it going, big dog?
What I've learned with that episode was when you can spend more time, like 3 hours with a conversation, you can kind of stay on topics longer and you get more details, more detailed storytelling. And there's a lot of advantages to doing a longer form podcast. So I kind of figured that out through doing that. But the downside is if someone's not interested in that story or that point, then the episode might drag a little bit. But I feel like with Steve, it was 3 hours of constant banger after banger after banger of kind of points made and kind of conversations. I feel like it was not stale at all for an entire 3 hours. And I mean that. And I feel like ending on a 3 hour episode is kind of epic because it kind of proves that I've kind of learned how to podcast, you know, starting from no knowledge on podcasting to ending with a 3 hour episode with somebody and being able to hold my own and kind of share and to kind of collaborate with someone and to be able to get 3 hours worth of information out of somebody where it's not stale, I think is a testament to how I've grown as a podcaster. Yeah, I think that episode summarizes that, and it summarizes a lot about retinitis pigmentosa and my viewpoints of how to adapt to retinitis pigmentosa. So yeah, those are my favorite episodes from each year of the podcast. And I just wanted to quickly go over that just to inspire people to kind of go back and check out some old ones, or just to kind of be nostalgic and reflect, if you've been a ride or die since the beginning. And then I do want to give a runner up to the episode I did with my mom. That was super fun. For most of my life, she was the only person with RP that I knew. And now that's obviously different after this podcast, but being able to share her story with the world and just have a one-on-one conversation that's more formal. It kind of felt strange because she's my mom, but to be able to do that was just a ton of fun.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
So with that said, I guess this podcast is coming to an end, and it feels surreal to say that. I'm soaking it in right now. But again, this isn't the end. I'm going to be doing a lot of solo videos. I want to cover a lot that I've learned, in relation to pregnancies and parenting as I learned that along the way. I want to share insights along the way. I want to continue to share updates as my RP progresses or stays the same, whatever it is. Just anytime I have an idea, I want to be able to express it and have an audience. And See-Through is going to be that for me, and it will always be that for me. And while it's a bummer that the podcast can't continue, for practical reasons, maybe it will come back in the future. Who knows? But right now is not the time for it. And it's time for new adventures. And I'm excited to see what happens. And again, I can't wait to be a dad. I think being a dad is going to be my favorite project I've ever been a part of. So I hope this episode sits well with everyone. I know some people are going to be disappointed with the podcast ending, but you'll be fine. You'll be completely fine. And I'll still be around. You can still get up with me, via all the platforms, social media. My email address is on my website. You can, find that at seethroughpod.com. You can find the contact button there. You can send me an email. You can send me a direct message, to stay in touch. On that note, make sure to go subscribe to my YouTube channel, because that's where I'm going to be posting mostly. That's going to be my main priority, YouTube. I'm kind of basically taking the podcast into a YouTuber kind of direction, which I basically have been doing the past few years. You've probably noticed that. But yeah, definitely go subscribe to the YouTube channel. And yeah, I kind of feel like I'm dragging this on because I'm like, I don't want the podcast to end, but I think the podcast is ending. So with that said, for the last time, stay transparent, everyone. Oh, and one more thing. I got to do this because it's symbolic.